Okay, so I've got my treasure tray set up over here, and I've got my paper here. I tried to set this up in a way where you can see how I'm drawing while I draw from observation. Like I showed you guys earlier, you can use the pencil method to kind of figure out where the halfway points of your objects are and where the halfway point horizontally of your objects are. I'm going to lay down my grid first, but then I'll show you like a little bit more of a simplified way of drawing things by using general shapes. So I'm dividing my paper in half. I'm not going to go onto my half-inch border here because I want to keep that clean. I don't want any part of my drawing to go out there. Okay. Now, ladies, what I like to do is I like to mark off the general area where my objects are on my page. Now, you might have experienced this before where you draw something like the cup, for example, and you draw it really big on the page, but then you realize, oh no, I ran out of space and my seashell is going to get cut off. If I were to make this cup fill up this whole space, there wouldn't be room for my seashell. What you want to do is really take note of where and how far down the seashell goes from the cup. I notice that when I hold up my pencil along the bottom of the cup, and you can see this here with me, I'm looking at the camera view here. This is where the bottom of my cup is, right here. And then this is how low down my seashell is. So we need to think about leaving that much space underneath the cup. Now we also need to think about leaving enough space for the top of the cup. Look how much taller it is from the seashell. It's pretty tall. So this is what I like to do when I'm starting a drawing. I'm going to mark off where the tallest part of my tallest object is. And for me, that's the top of the cup up here, like this upper edge of the cup. I'm going to mark that off over here. I'm going to say it's about here. I'm not going to start drawing the whole cup yet because right now I'm just trying to figure out the shapes and how spread apart they are. Think about the distance between objects. Do they overlap in any way? For me, they don't. But that's something you need to think about too. So up here, that's where the top of my cup is. Okay? Now, if I were to hold my pencil across, just because this feels easiest for me, I'm noticing that this is where the bottom of the cup is right here. Okay? Now, down here, that's where the bottom of the seashell is. And I'm noticing that the seashell is not quite the height of the cup. So this is about how tall my seashell is. The cup is like a little bit taller than that. So I can figure out that if this is halfway across my drawing, and this is halfway across my drawing, the bottom of my cup is actually going to be somewhere around here. Not drawing the whole thing right now, I'm just marking off shapes. So again, to explain that to you, right here, that's where the bottom of my cup is. This pencil represents this line, okay? So if this is about halfway, and this is about halfway, the cup comes like slightly below that halfway pencil line for me. So this is the space that my cup is going to fit into. Now, I'm not going to start drawing the cup yet. I want to figure out my seashell. So if this line right here is where the bottom of my cup is, what do you notice about the seashell? How much is above the pencil? How much is below the pencil? And then also think about the space between the cup and the seashell. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and drop in where I think the sides of my cup are going to be. I'm just going to do a very, very loose sketch of how I see the cup. Now I'm noticing that the opening of the cup is pretty wide. It's not just going to have like a flat bottom, kind of like how I sketched here. It's pretty round because we're looking down on it. And the bottom of the cup is round. The only time the cup would look flat is if we were looking at it like this. See how this is now like a straight line? But because we're looking down on it, it curves. Okay. So I've got a general shape. Okay. Now my seashell, I'm noticing that the point of it is about half my composition. This is half my composition. This is half of my composition. So my seashell is going to sit somewhere around in this area. Okay. Now, remember how I showed you we want to figure out how tall the seashell goes above the middle line here. Okay, so right here, the seashell, if this is the bottom of the cup, the seashell comes a little bit taller than that. So if this is my horizontal line, the seashell is about here. That's where the point of it is. Just kind of looking like this. And then I'm noticing that it comes down pretty low. Okay, so right here is the middle. That's where the point of the seashell goes. And then a lot of it, I'm also looking at how far away from the cup the seashell goes. I'm thinking the bottom of it is going to be somewhere, and that's this part I'm talking about. It's going to be somewhere in this area, okay? So if this is the middle, I'm also looking for how wide the seashell goes. I think it comes to about here. It's all about eyeballing things, putting something down on the paper, and then reevaluating once something is down. If you have nothing on your paper, you don't really have anything to go off of. So it's better just put something down and then figure out where you want to go from there. So for my seashell, I'm just going to drop in, now that I've kind of figured out where it fits on the page, I'm going to just drop in some very loose general shapes. And I'm thinking that this, and notice how I'm holding my pencil too here, ladies. It's very, very loose in my hand. I'm drawing very lightly, so it's very sketchy, and that's okay. Remember when we did blind contour drawings where you don't look at your paper, you're only looking at your subject? You want to draw blindly here about 70% of the time. Just look at your subject. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm just looking at the edge of the seashell. That outer outline. Just worry about the outlines right now. Okay. So now I've got a very, very rough general shape, and that's okay. Now what I'm going to do is just reassess. Does anything need to move? Is the seashell too big? What I'm noticing is I think about this empty space around my objects just as much as I think about the filled space that the objects take up. And maybe my seashell just needs to be a little bit shorter. Maybe it's going to fill up something like this amount of space. It's okay to use your intuition here to figure out what something looks like. Now notice that I drew new lines first before I erased these old ones. The old lines can help you figure out the shape of things. I'm noticing that my seashell is a little bit longer in this area, so I'm going to extend it down a little bit. Okay, so I'm noticing as I'm looking at this, I'm pretty happy with the general chunky shape of my seashell. I'm noticing that I need to make some adjustments to my cup now. So I feel like the opening of the cup is a little bit wider than I originally had it. So I'm going to just widen that a little bit. These ellipses or these ovals are very important for getting the perspective and the proportion right on your objects. And remember, it's okay to move your hand in whatever position feels comfortable for you. As long as you're drawing lightly, that's what really, really matters. So my cup is a little bit wider there. I'm noticing that it has this piece that sort of comes down here, and I'm making sure that this circle is the same as this sort of circle. Let me clean this up a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing. So I made the mouth of my cup a little bit wider. This like edge of the cup, this guy that we're looking at right here, it's the same kind of oval as the opening of the cup. Okay, so I've got that opening there. And then thinking about the bottom of my cup over here, I'm going to start to clean up some edges. These gummy erasers are great because they can erase slightly without having to really rub your paper and erase too much. So I've got those edges. And then notice how tapered in the cup is because we're looking down on it. If we were looking straight at it, the edges, well, I mean, they're still kind of tapered. The edges might be a little bit straighter, but because we're looking down, they're sort of like a cone here. And then keep in mind that when you're doing the bottom here, if you were to be able to see inside of the cup, if it were see-through, you would also see this little round piece on the inside. So use that visualization to help you figure out how wide the bottom of your cup should be. As long as you draw lightly, you can keep rearranging and moving these things around as much as you need to. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with those basic lines. Now what you can do, ladies, when you're trying to figure out the edge of your board, think about that diagonal. Think about these diagonal angles. If the video box that we're looking at is a perfect rectangle, which it is, notice how diagonal these shapes are. Try to eyeball those. So the thing that I was showing you the other day about like tilting your pencil, moving it onto your paper, that's your diagonal line right there. Eyeball it with your pencil. Try to keep it the same diagonal line. And then think about how far the objects are from the board itself. Look at this space between the bottom of the seashell. So I might not actually even need to draw my board down here because there's a pretty good amount of space there. But I will need the edge over here. So I'm looking at this angle. Think about this diagonal here. I'm going to bring that over onto my paper. Start to loosely sketch that out. I'm thinking about how far that diagonal line is from the seashell. I think this looks pretty good here. And then notice that the back of the board, the cup overlaps it. So I need to figure out where on my cup do those lines meet. So I'll usually do some light little marks here to figure that out. I'm going to figure out that diagonal. It's not very steep. Yeah, I feel like it could maybe be a little bit taller here. So again, I'm still drawing the new lines first before I erase my old lines. And then notice how much space is here between the cup and the edge. It's only about that much. This is a fairly straight line right here. It's a fairly upright, fairly vertical edge. Okay, so once you've got your basic shapes established here, you can start to go in and add some details. So this is the same process as kind of figuring out where things go. You're just looking for relationships in the objects themselves. So where do these lines cross over each other? Start to look for slightly smaller shapes now that you've got your biggest shapes figured out. Where do the smaller ones happen? Just adapt and adjust as you go. You're just gonna really try to think about where you see things happen. You want to always draw what you see. Don't just draw what's in your brain. Try not to just make things up as you go along. You really want to try to be dedicated to seeing. And then make sure you clean up as you go along. So that's a very quick introduction to drawing from observation. Just make sure that you clean up lines when you're finished. You got it.